To the Kenny Report.
There's a lot of focus on China, its relationship with Australia, and a fascinating story on the weekend from my colleague at The Australian, David Pemberthy, looked at the way a Chinese consulate has created a large compound in the suburbs of Adelaide. There are grave fears that it's more than a consulate, but more like a spying base, very interested in the defence industries and submarine projects and the like in South Australia. Have a look at some of what Pembo put on air for The Australian.
Last year, protesters daubed the consul with graffiti denouncing China's aggression in Hong Kong. And in response to that, the consul installed this long row of security cameras right along its outside perimeter, some of which point directly into neighbouring residents' homes. So, Brian, can you tell us again what happened with the drone?
I was out talking on the footpath with a neighbour of mine, and all of a sudden we saw a drone going over the neighbourhood around this area, and we thought, is that legal?
There we go, that's in Adelaide, South Australia. Let's now go to the Liberal member for Fairfax in Queensland, Ted O'Brien, who's been writing and thinking about China for a long while. Good to talk to you, Ted. Just firstly on that issue, do you think that the government, federally, and indeed the neighbourhood in South Australia ought to be concerned about that sort of a compound around the Chinese consulate?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chris. I don't blame the neighbours in that suburb at all for having a degree of concern and raising their concerns. No doubt the Foreign Minister will be getting the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to look into the issue. For me, this just goes to the concern that everyday Australians have at the moment about the Australia-China relationship. No longer is this a matter of high politics. It's involving mainstream Australia. And I personally believe that resolving the China question is probably the biggest challenge of our generation.
I think
it's
you're
really
right.
a China issue rather than COVID.
Sorry, yeah, you're an expert in this area. Of course, COVID is related to it, certainly as a current issue, a current irritant. But in some of what you've been writing and arguing lately, you say that China is very deliberately trying to divide our business community and our government. Explain how it's doing that and why it would want to do that.
So, I mean, you could almost apply a bit of Sun Tzu to this, Chris, if you like. A belief by a philosopher, military philosopher of China, that the greatest thing you can do is to divide people, divide the external actors. And in this case, it's a matter of the People's Republic of China trying to pit the Australian community against each other, so the business community against government. And so when you see business leaders, as they have done for the last 12 to 18 months, in response to the punitive measures introduced by China, step up to the microphone, go on television, go to newspapers and try to give gratuitous advice to the government, then every time that happens, China smiles, because that is precisely what they are wanting to do. They are wanting the business community to put undue pressure on the political community in Australia in the hope that we would fold. And what we need to do is have very clear eyes on that. The Australian business community need to have a better understanding when it comes to what China is trying to achieve in that regard.
They sure do. It's not all about dollars and cents for them. That's all the time we've got for you tonight, Ted. Thanks. I'd like to have you back on again soon to talk about some of those issues in more depth.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Chris.
Ted O'Brien there, the member for Fairfax. I did want to get to some of your feedback, though, because a lot of you had something to say about this bloke we showed you on Friday. Yeah, that's the Deputy Premier of Queensland and Stephen Miles tearing up that bill sent from New South Wales. Sylvia Bell says this man couldn't run a bath, let alone help run a state. How on earth do these lightweights get into such high positions? Scott Doherty says, I hope the people of his electorate are proud of themselves that the rest of Queensland have to put up with this tosser. Brad Frost says, a showboating flog. But if he likes to rip things, start with the ALP's youth justice legislation. And Alan Gordon says, really shows poor quality of politicians when putting on a stunt like that. But have a look what his Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, had to say about that bill from New South Wales today.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous for New South Wales to be sending us a bill. I mean, you know, we obviously are doing quarantine for some of their residents. We're not charging them. this is normal work that we've been doing.
How disingenuous. How disingenuous indeed, as if Queensland has been looking after people from New South Wales. Just pay the bill. We are one country. Thanks for joining me. Peter Credlin next.